Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2021. Which is bringing us to a current conversation that we are having, you and I, with respect to the recent box set, Blu-ray collector set release made by Criterion a few weeks back, and it is the set which has been given as a set overall, Spy number 1103. And there are a number of films included in such set, the title of such set overall being Once Upon a Time in China, the complete films. So today I'd like to focus our attention on one of such films in this set. It is a film from 1994, and the director is Tsui Hark, and the name of the work is Once Upon a Time in China 5. This is the work from 1994, and the director is once again Tsui Hark. And we have a wonderful cast, included in which are, for example, Vincent Zhao and Rosamund Kwan and Jean Wang and Kent Chung and Max Mock and Xiang Xinxing and Lao Shun and Roger Kwok and others. And please, once again, I deeply apologize for my very poor pronunciation, but the title of this work is黃飛鴻之五龍城殲霸, or in English, Once Upon a Time in China 5. So this is based on the Roman numeral here that is affixed to the title. This is the fifth film in this Once Upon a Time in China series that we saw from a few years prior with the first film. And of course, you've seen the cycle of films, that cycle of films being the subject matter of this really extraordinary Blu-ray set from Criterion, Once Upon a Time in China, the complete films. Again, the fifth film being Once Upon a Time in China 5. So let us now focus somewhat briefly on the plot or story structure of this film, Once Upon a Time in China 5. I think we can say from the offset that it is a film that I think fits in very nicely into the universe of Once Upon a Time in China, this series, which is a point that was raised very eloquently and very convincingly by many people, including Tony Raines in the Disc 1 interview with him in the supplement section of such Disc 1. And so I think that is, or that can be revealed when one is thinking about the plot of this film. So we are still in this time period, sort of turn of the century, Qing dynasty, but we also understand that there are many pressures, both politically, diplomatically, and militarily, that China is facing on its own front vis-a-vis the outside world. And we know that in the buildup of the plot of the prior film, the immediately prior film, Once Upon a Time in China 4, there was that international intrigue political element that was introduced with the focus, to some degree anyway, on what is often referred to in the historical context as the Eight-Nation Alliance. And so we have, therefore, this film essentially picking up that strand or that connected thread to a certain degree anyway, or where we see or we get a sense of a type of imminent threat or danger, or the imminent, say, downfall of the Qing dynasty, China, due to many factors, one of which perhaps being this type of pressure from outside, from a militaristic point of view, as expressed, as I say, in the build-up to the sort of climactic moments of the prior film. And now we see a type of resulting aspect or consequence at the start, or as part of the film's impetus forward throughout its own plot. And so therefore we see the gang, as it were, Wang Feiheng and the Circle, now trying essentially to react to these particular situations. And one of the ways in which they feel like they should react is going back to Foshan and perhaps trying to find some other way to essentially escape. And one of their solutions is maybe to try to reach Hong Kong. So that is, I think, a new ripple or a new element that is being introduced, which is a very interesting one, by the way. However, perhaps it could be said, too, that that is not necessarily the main, primary, or direct focal point of the plot, because we know that this is also in many ways a type of setup or build-up for the types of extremely entertaining martial arts, action-adventure entertainment that is to become part of, or primary part of this film, Once Upon a Time in China 5, because we have this idea of seafair voyage, we have the idea of the coastline, we also have the idea of the antagonistic groups, pirate forces that seem also to be bent on a type of antagonism against Wang Feiheng and company. And this also is something that's coming about due to the underlying confusion that is taking place due to these military-based pressures from abroad, again, as expressed through the Eight-Nation Alliance consequences. And so through this, or in this haze or fog of confusion, these antagonistic forces are arising that are threatening the coastline, thus threatening Wang Feiheng and company. And so there is a lack of law and order, there is sort of chaos, and so who is to come in to help try to fill this void and try to fend off against these forces of chaos and try to establish some kind of protection or some kind of order amongst this chaos? It's Wang Feiheng and company in that very legendary, iconic, and incredibly noble way that we have come to know Wang Feiheng, the character, the legend, the man, throughout our watching and experiencing all of these films, including, my friends, including this fifth work, Once Upon a Time in China 5. So in that way, therefore, the plot then leads to these very entertaining setups and martial arts real action set pieces, tour de forces, if you will, which are themselves very, very entertaining. And so we have that line of continuity there. And of course we have at the center of this the very commanding performance by Vincent Zhao as Wang Feiheng. I've mentioned it in the prior video discussion on the fourth film, but I think Vincent Zhao, his performance is very striking in how it has certain differences from Jet Li's iconic performance as Wang Feiheng in the first three films. And of course we'll see Jet Li again in a subsequent movie. But in Vincent Zhao's hands, I think this portrayal of Wang Feiheng has its own sense of charisma, and style, a charismatic outlook. There's a real quickness of command over the physicality. There's a type of sharpness of movement. There's also a type of earnestness and eagerness in his facial expression when there are those moments of dialogue or those moments of contemplation in terms of what the characters will do next. So I think it is a really fantastic type of performance that he brings. And so it is with this type of performance that really propels the plot forward to its very exciting climaxes or climactic scenes, if you will. They involve not just martial arts, but a very interesting, intriguing blend of, say, martial arts and weaponry, guns. We have seen the use or the application or the discussion of the theme of outside influence into China. One of such influences being the introduction of advanced military-based technology, including firearms. And so we have, therefore, Wang Feiheng and other martial artists, masters, who seem to be struggling with this idea of how can martial arts survive, when there are these further emerging, say, sources of weapons coming from many different places, which can essentially threaten the very existence of the core philosophy of martial arts, regardless of the specific school, as it were. So this forms, and we saw this kind of struggle expressed so beautifully in a key moment all the way back in the first film in terms of, say, factional infighting. But even so, even amongst the factional infighting in terms of the martial arts philosophies that were dueling in that film, there was still this joint struggle that was mutually acknowledged, which was namely, how can martial arts survive in this emerging world of guns and cannons? And so I think this type of question finds fruition and answer so beautifully and so aggressively and heart-poundingly and gloriously excitingly in terms of the various action set pieces that we see in Once Upon a Time in China 5, and Wang Feihong and Jimmy Zhao's performance as Wang Feihong trying to deal with the almost ballet type of choreography that involves both the martial arts physical aspect of the use of one's body and the weapon as a type of extension of one's body in the hands of Wang Feihong. It is a fascinating turn of events that I think is a source of very maybe multi-leveled aspects, and I'll try to get to those multi-leveled aspects later on in this video discussion momentarily. So that, I would say, is it is the maybe essential plot without giving away too much in terms of how this film is, on the one hand, maybe using history as a turn of the century Chinese history, and also the threads that were left at the climax of the fourth film, using those as type of jumping off points to create a type of almost a sense of martial arts, almost swashbuckling type of romantic action adventure film on the one hand. And in that way it exceeds, or it succeeds very well as this really fun source of entertainment, as all the other films have done. So in that way, it serves as a continuing example of the greatness of this series. So that is one way in which we can see, in an interesting way, a type of continuity, as it were, the source of entertainment that comes from the action sequences that are so timed precisely in that sort of way. I think also we should mention two other maybe fundamental areas of discussion here. So one such fundamental area of discussion, I would say, is to maybe jump off of or to connect with my earlier comment about how this film seems to be, or the plot seems to be jumping off from a point of, say, a discussion of history, turn of the century Chinese history. I think this is a very important point too, because, let me take a step back. One of the great strengths, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again because I think it's worth repeating, which is, I think one of the great strengths of the Criterion Collection release of these films, Once Upon a Time in China, the complete films, I think one of the great strengths is that it is making a very convincing argument to consider the cycle of films not in the context of a trilogy, 1, 2, 3, but actually in the context of a series of 5 or 6 films, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the 6th film, Once Upon a Time in China and America. But in any event, we have this cycle of works. And I think Tony Raines explains it and describes it and makes the argument for it very well in that Disc 1 supplement interview. So in that way, one can look at Once Upon a Time in China 5 as a type of continuation of the various themes and concerns and ideas that were established and discussed all the way back in the first film, and then continuing on to the second film, obviously, then the third film, and then the previous fourth film, and now here in the fifth film. Now, I mentioned one of them already, which is this idea of the use of weaponry, and how Wang Feihong and company and other martial artists that we have met in many films along the way seem to have this uneasy relationship with the emerging military technology. We have seen guns serve a certain purpose in various action sequences since the very first film. We've seen bullets serve a very interesting purpose from the very first film, if you recall, a very interesting aspect of that film, etc. But we also see a type of struggle that Wang Feihong and other martial artists and others seem to have against this introduction of these weapons and the proliferation of weapons, and how that might threaten the very existence of the philosophy of martial arts, and what are martial arts philosophers, or what are philosophers like Wang Feihong and others to do when we have this essentially what one could call an external threat that is coming into the interior territories. and essentially not just threatening people, but essentially causing death and destruction and other such mayhem along the way that serves to pose great threats to sort of the internal dynamics and the very source of the pride and identity of China. And that type of spirit. So this forms, I think, really fundamental questions of doubt that have, as I say, been established ever since the first film. Well, and I think that is also linked to this idea of, it's linked to, in terms of a character study of Wang Feiheng, it is linked, or the argument can be made, it is linked to the idea of Wang Feiheng as being a very, in terms of the portrayal by Jet Li and others, as a type of strict, or a man who has a strict adherence to these Confucian values, and he's also therefore portrayed in the sort of strict adherence to such traditional values type of perspective. And one of the great joys, or one of the great interesting aspects of Wang Feiheng, the character, as we see him throughout the films, is how that strictness seems to be adapting or evolving or eroding or otherwise maybe otherwise changing given these various circumstances. For example, the circumstance of the emergence of military technology. So if in that way, it's really interesting. In the first film, we see a type of strict adherence to this type of traditional code, which then can be said to be adapting to the changing times, all the way up to, say, this fifth film, where we have not just a type of acceptance of military technology, but an actual embrace of such military technology to the point that it becomes an integral part of some of the key martial arts fighting sequences of the film, very ballet-like, etc., and the use of the gun, etc. There's, I think, many echoes can be made to, say, films like by John Woo, or maybe more recent examples like John Wick, etc. So it's that type of example that's being set and that's being shown in Once Upon a Time in China 5, some of the very fun and exciting action sequences. So in that way, that is an example of the character evolution or development of Wang Feiheng from the first film to the fifth film. So in that way, the fifth film is a type of key work in this whole cycle. So that's one way in which we see this type of consistency and discussion and through line all the way through these works leading up to this fifth film. Another way, too, is this idea of history and how these films, the Once Upon a Time in China films, how they discuss points of history, not just in terms of using them as reference points for the plot dynamics, and not only using them for the sake of, say, examining various aspects of tradition and culture, the idea of tradition versus modernity in the context of the emerging historical dynamics of late 19th century Qing dynasty into the turn of the century. So we have this context of the historical times and settings. Of course, there are some artistic liberties that are being made, and everything's not necessarily exactly as it says it happened in history books. We know this, but still, despite those artistic liberties, still there is a sense of the use of history or the discussion of history in the context of these various stories, including Part 5. At the same time, we also understand, and I think Tony Raines, again, in that brilliant interview on Disc 1, explained it so well. We also understand that these films are being made in the 1990s, this film being released in 94. And we have to keep in mind, too, the key year in the context of Hong Kong-Chinese relationships, the relationship between China and Hong Kong, the key year during this time being 1997, and it is close. 1997 is not far away from 1994 after all. And so in that way, too, this film, the fifth film, like the other films, has this discussion of the historical past and the historical context, or the context of the historical past on the one hand, but also at the same time, it has a potent currency with the present. And I think that potency, or the potent currency, of the present moment, as I think given voice in Once Upon a Time in China 5, finds its echo when we understand that these characters, Wang Feiheng and company, understand that due to the crumbling political dynamics between China and the outside world, they have to essentially escape And where do they try to escape to? At least where do they want to escape to? They talk about Hong Kong. So their directional focus is from China to Hong Kong. Along the way, of course, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of confusion and uncertainty. So if we think of that unidirectional flow of these characters in this film, from China to Hong Kong, along the way there is uncertainty and confusion. Keep that in mind, right? Because if we think now of the climate of 1994, at least described by great historians and academics like Tony Raines and others who describe it much better than I can ever hope to imagine, to try to even fathom to explain. But still, my understanding is that during this period in the early to mid 1990s, there is also this idea of uncertainty and confusion, and also this idea of not knowing and what the future will hold for the sort of the state of the people living in Hong Kong once 1997 happens, in terms of the handover to China, and what that will mean for people on both sides of this particular situation. And so in that way, it's a very interesting type of parallelism going on. In the film, we have one direction from China to Hong Kong, or at least that's the plan anyway, going this way. In the present period, we have the opposite direction, right, which is fast approaching, because once we hit 1997, Hong Kong will go back to China. So it's going in this direction, while the characters in the film are going in that direction. Even so, even in this bi-directional situation, in both directions, there's still this sense of uncertainty and angst and a type of confusion that is still going on. So no matter what direction we find ourselves in, there is still that echo, that parallel that's going on between past and present, between what we see on cinema and what the people must have been feeling in those movie theaters at the time when they were watching this film, again, in the early to mid 1990s. So those echoes and parallels are incredibly potent and incredibly powerful indeed. And they exist with the other films in the series, of course, all the way from the first film. But I would suggest too that they exist with a great degree of potency, at least potentially so anyway, when we think about Part 5 and its release period, again, from 1994, and given those various plot points as well. So in that way, it still holds a sense of place within the context of the Once Upon a Time in China series, but also holds its own because of the intriguing and unique plot points that it employs, while also being a film of the moment with a certain potent currency. So in that way, it fits in, I think, like a very warm and comfortable glove, as it were, into the rest of the series. And so this recalibration by Criterion to treat it, and also Part 4 as well, as part of the series, I think is not only remarkable, but also incredibly valuable and very educational. And it makes me see, it allows me to see the series in a slightly different, or quite a different way. And it's very illuminating indeed. I should say, too, about this idea of continuity between this film and the other films, which is one of the sources of, I think, intrigue about the film itself. Well, first, we should mention that we have a type of return, a homecoming of sorts. Throughout the films, ever since we've gotten from the second film, 2, 3, 4, we've been away from Foshan, and we've only had maybe a select few of the disciples that have been accompanying Wang Feiheng on his various adventures to other parts of China, the Canton region, or to Beijing, etc. And so we haven't, so maybe there are some disciples that we met in the first film that we haven't seen up to now in, say, 2, 3, and 4. Well, now we have a chance to see some of our old friends, as it were. So who am I referring to? I'm referring to, for example, the character of So, credited here, Bucktooth So, and there's also the character of Wing as well. So although the character of So had been played by Jackie Chung in the first film, here he's played by Roger Kwok. It's a welcome return of this very lovable character. Wing as well, being portrayed in the first film by Ken Chung, now is also being portrayed by Ken Chung. So we see the return of these. So it's a nice homecoming of sorts when we meet these old friends, as it were, or we are reunited with these old friends, as it were. We should also mention too, speaking of that level, we also have Clubfoot, and we also have Leung Fun, which we know from all those past films as well, and we've come to know and love. Another very key relationship that we have seen ever since the first film is, of course, that relationship between Wang Feiheng and the 13th aunt, Tsui Quan. And so we had a little bit of an interesting development, did we not, with the fourth film, because Tsui Quan did not appear. She was mentioned, of course, but she did not appear in the fourth film. And instead, we were introduced in that film to the 14th aunt, as portrayed by Jean Wang. And I think maybe on paper, there might have been certain limitations as far as that particular character is concerned. But I think Jean Wang is such a great performer. I think her portrayal as 14th aunt was really quite splendid. And she added a certain dynamic in terms of also remembering that we have a new actor, Vincent Zhao, as Wang Feiheng. And so in that fourth film, I think her introduction allows for, say, an ease of acceptability of this new actor, because we have a different dynamic and we have the ability, therefore, to be there when we have the first introductions of the screen chemistry between 14th aunt, this new character that we're meeting, and the new performer, Vincent Zhao, as Wang Feiheng. So I really like the idea of having this new character, 14th aunt, although I love Tsui Quan, the 13th aunt character, very much so. And so Rosamund Kwan, she was very, very missed by me as a viewer of the fourth film. But with that in mind, of course, we do now know that 13th aunt Tsui Quan returns to the situation here in part 5. And so this is a very interesting turn of events in my view, for a couple of reasons. So first of all, as I say, I really adore Vincent Zhao's performance, I think, as Wang Feiheng. It's really great. However, for me, there is still this element of a kind of the chemistry between 13th aunt and Jet Li's Wang Feiheng is, I think, so tender and so warm and so powerful, and that's what makes it so attractive to me as a viewer. And so when we have a new actor stepping into the shoes of the character Wang Feiheng, the chemistry between Vincent Zhao and Rosamund Kwan isn't necessarily of the same type of chemistry to me as that between Jet Li and Rosamund Kwan. And so that dynamic affects my viewing of this film, in particular the relationship dynamic between the characters 13th aunt and Wang Feiheng. It's not a make or break type of moment for me, and so I can still maybe acknowledge those sorts of issues for me personally and still really go along with the film, and I'm very entertained by the film, and it doesn't affect me at all in that way negatively. But still, it's something that I acknowledge. This is somewhat of an issue for me. There is undoubtedly for me a difference of chemistry, tones and values in terms of the chemistry between Vincent Zhao and Rosamund Kwan. And so that kind of affects how I see this particular relationship. And it's really interesting too, because in part 5 we see in many respects a type of maybe resolution to a number of the subtle plot developments and character moments that we saw established in the earlier films. So as I say, just like with other aspects, part 5 is a type of resolution, a type of climax to a lot of the themes that were initiated all the way back to, say, the first film, including the relationship dynamic between Wang Feiheng and 13th aunt. And so in the hands of a new actor, Vincent Zhao, while there might be on paper, in terms of plot, efforts to try to resolve a number of these character, say, subplots, it doesn't quite do it for me, which is actually why I think that part 6, Once Upon a Time in China and America, when we have the return of Jet Li in the role, that's where I feel like we get a number of plot resolutions vis-a-vis that relationship, and that in that way, in my mind, I think the 6th film is an integral part of the entire cycle. But I'll talk about that when we get to the 6th film. Be that as it may, I do like the return of Rosamund Kwan. I really do. And I think the actors do the best that they can with this particular situation, Vincent Zhao and Rosamund Kwan. And so there are some really lovely moments. I point to one of the great moments where there is some shadowed silhouette action going on. And the shadowed silhouette is cause for certain element of misunderstanding. And that leads to some kind of romantic misunderstanding hijinks, because there is a kind of a love triangle that is established with the return of the 13th aunt. Therefore, the love triangle of sorts being 13th aunt, 14th aunt, and Wang Feiheng. And so there is this scene involving shadowed silhouettes. And I love this moment too, because it is so funny and witty and clever, and it's playing with this idea of the moving image. It's recalling, of course, the notion of the moving image, the camera that was so important, the kind of meta moment, the treatment of cinema, the photograph that we've seen all the way since part one. Also, in past films, we saw shadow play on the walls. And there were some really lovely scenes where the shadow was used as a means for the characters to imagine what it was that they were feeling, that they could otherwise not express in words because they were shy, or they were otherwise emotionally just not ready to reveal their feelings to the other person. And so the shadow play in those past films, I think, has its echo in this very magical moment in part 5 involving the silhouette. So I really like those moments, and it reminds me, it makes me comfortable with the fact that while maybe it's not necessarily the same character dynamic, there is still that spark of warmth and genuineness in the air that is enough for me to go along for the ride, with this in the context of the relationship between Wang Feiheng and the 13th aunt Tsui Kwan. So I really like that very much. And also I should say too that with the introduction of the 13th aunt, we have then the as I mentioned, the love triangle, kind of 13th aunt, 14th aunt, and Wang Feiheng. And so this makes, I think, that relationship very interesting. And also, there is a real interesting ease of communication and this relationship flow dynamic between Jean Wang's 14th aunt and Rosamund Kwan's 13th aunt. Their scenes together, I think, are really tender, and they have this type of warmth of spirit, while there's a type of maybe subtle rivalry that is occurring between them, or maybe there is, or maybe one person thinks there is and the other person doesn't. That idea of misunderstanding is also one of the great foundations for romance, drama, and also comedy as well, which is another one of the hallmarks of this film and also the cycle of films writ large. So this is my very long-winded way, I apologize, to say that while there are certain issues perhaps in terms of the changing dynamics of varying actors who appear and then disappear and come back, and then new actors replace other actors, etc., still I think this film does a really interesting job with those elements, and it still feels quite consistent with what we have seen before, while still forging some new territory. And I think in this area, in the new territory, is the engagement between or among the trio. And it leads to some really interesting plot moments and character moments along the way. So while not necessarily be perfect, I think it's doing the best that it can under the circumstances. So it's doing it very well indeed. So for those reasons, therefore, I think this film, Once Upon a Time in China 5, is very interesting, very engaging, very entertaining. And as I say, it is a wonderful thing that Criterion is including it in this way, because it helps to regard this series of films as I say, a cycle, included in which is this 5th film, which is Once Upon a Time in China 5. So the Criterion Collection has released this box set, which is a Blu-ray set. And so as we know, each of the films is housed or located on one disc. So Once Upon a Time in China 5 is located on disc number 5, the 5th disc, and it is purported to be based on a 2K digital restoration of the work. I should point out too that the soundtrack option is the Cantonese language mono soundtrack, 1.0 mono soundtrack. And so this is a film that, again, like the 4th film, is one where my knowledge of the prior physical media release history is limited, or close to, if not nil. So very much like, and in fact that's true for the other films as well, but in particular parts 4 and 5, and so that means 5. But my feeling, therefore, my reaction to this inclusion of this film in this set, with the restoration, presentation, and how it looks and sounds, is very exciting indeed. I think the inclusion of this film is one of the great strengths of this set, and the way it looks and sounds, it's like, wow, this is really, really quite remarkable indeed. It's calls for celebration. There's a return of many things. In my discussion earlier, I said it was a return of a lot of things. I now realize I didn't mention one very important thing too, which is the return of Tsui Hark in the director's chair. And I think for a lot of people, in many ways, because Tsui Hark didn't direct the fourth film, and also because Vincent Zhao is appearing in 4 and 5 instead of Jet Li, I think these films were marketed such that there was emphasis placed on the first 3 as a type of trilogy, with maybe part 6 as well in that marketing. But maybe in that situation, I'm not sure how much attention 4 and 5 got. So in that context, however, we know that in the discussions with Tsui Hark, in many of the other interviews found on the other discs, also in the discussion with Tony Raines, also in the essays that we have here, we'll talk about in a separate video, etc. This whole set is making the case, therefore, that Part 5 is not just a worthy member of this cycle of films, it is an essential member of this cycle of films. And so in that way, it's wonderful to have it. And it's another example of Tsui Hark's directorial skill and efforts as a cinematic artist and such. And so it's, I think, this, as I say, the great strength of this Criterion set, or one of the great strengths of this Criterion set, is the inclusion of Part 5, and the way it looks and sounds is, to my eyes and to my ears, very remarkable indeed. So I don't criticize the set for not including any other language soundtracks. I'm very happy with Cantonese language soundtrack here, so this doesn't bother me at all. I will echo perhaps my criticisms in regard to the Criterion's 4th disc by saying, like with that disc, I would have liked to have seen maybe a commentary track, or like to have heard, an optional commentary track for Once Upon a Time in China 5. There isn't any commentary track, unfortunately. There aren't also any Part 5 specific supplements here as well. There's a great supplement on Disc 5, and we'll get to that in a moment, but there aren't any Part 5 specific supplements. I would have loved to have gotten a Part 5 specific one, maybe just a discussion of where the plot was after the end of 4, where the gang was, who were we meeting again, what was going on with the cast, because there were some certain cast changes, what were the circumstances involving the return of 13th Aunt Rosamund Kwan, what was the dynamic like, etc., Vincent Zhao working with, etc. So it would have been so great to hear those stories. We don't get those, at least in this Criterion set. So that's a shame. That's a real shame. However, I go back always to the fact that we get the film regardless. And so that is not just better than nothing. It is a real cause for celebration indeed. So while it might not be perfect in my eyes, it is still very, very, very strong indeed. So that is my way of trying to, once again, further highlight the fact, or highlight the strengths that I see in this particular set, namely the inclusion of 4 and 5, but also the treatment of 4 and 5 as worthy members and essential members in this cycle of films, Once Upon a Time in China. And that brings us to the 5th disc's, say, supplement section. So unfortunately, there aren't that many, but what we do get is so valuable and so brilliant. I'm really glad it's here. This is called Daring Difference, and it's from 2021. It's approximately 10 minutes, and it's a one-on-one interview with Nan Sun-shi. And Nan Sun-shi is very, very important in terms of Hong Kong cinema in terms of Hong Kong cinema during this particular, or Hong Kong entertainment in her work in television is also to be regarded. Hong Kong TV, cinema, entertainment in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even now, up to now. And so she is a very strong voice in this cinema of the world, and she is mentioned in a number of places elsewhere. For example, in the Tony Raines interview, when he's talking about the background of film workshop, etc. And so she is an essential member, an essential participant, an essential creative force behind this particular period. And so it's great to hear from her in her wonderfully brilliant way of expression. Just to hear her speak is just so, it's lovely, absolutely lovely, and just brilliant and intelligent and so clear, and just giving us the background from her journey and her experience working in terms of television work, Cinema City. This is a very key aspect of the history leading up to that series of films in the 80s and then in the 90s into Once Upon a Time in China. Working in terms of the various group members that she was working with at the time, including, of course, her relationship with Tsui Hark, a type of group creativity. That's something that she mentions here, which is very interesting indeed. So there's a type of creative force in the works here. And speaking of which, this idea of trying to have also a sense of independence of artistic voice, and that led to this type of collaboration. Again, Tsui Hark collaboration is a very important one during this time. The establishment of film workshop in the 1980s, and this idea of a joint collaboration, and how this resulted in a number of incredible, memorable, and iconic works that remain iconic to this day, Chinese Ghost Story, etc., and also a Once Upon a Time in China series. And so this relationship, this professional relationship, led to many key landmark films the world over. And so these comments from her, and sort of the idea, or the emphasis on creativity and the independent spirit on the one hand, but also the need to sort of appreciate the real hard work and effort that is going into these complex budgeted productions, etc., that lead to, or that yield, remarkable results, as they have done throughout the entire filmography track record of Nanshan. This is an incredible 10-minute interview. So please check it out if you can. Again, her role is essential. So it's great to hear from her perspective as well, this period of time. And also, too, we should point out that her comments are not just relevant to Once Upon a Time in China, not just relevant to Tsui Hark and her relationship with Tsui Hark. They're also relevant to this idea of Hong Kong cinema and the movements and thoughts and thinking and approaches of the many players in Hong Kong cinema during the 70s and 80s. And this is becoming a period that is getting, and 90s, etc. And this is becoming a period that is getting a lot more focus from the Criterion Collection and others. But for example, the Criterion Collection, with a number of releases that are focusing in on great examples of Hong Kong cinema, including this set, Once Upon a Time in China, the complete films, as well as some other films that we will see along over the horizon in the coming months. So this discussion is very relevant to the notion of the importance and the dynamics of this cinema, this very important and vital and dynamic cinema from Hong Kong during this period. So her comments are, I would say, essential in many respects, and it's wonderful to hear her express those in this great interview. So please check it out if you can. Daring Difference, the interview with Nanshan, approximately 10 minutes. And then we have the trailer, which is the brief trailer. The trailers are a lot of fun, but again, if you're interested, please check out the trailer. That is it as far as the supplements go. So in terms of quantity, it's very low. In terms of quality, that interview is top notch. top notch. So please check that one out if you can. Again, it's relevant not just to Once Upon a Time in China, although it is relevant to that as well. It's also relevant to the cinema of Hong Kong overall. So wonderful job. Please check that out if you can, if you're interested in that. So once again, I should repeat my criticisms of the set here, which is I would have loved to have had more discussion, maybe more discussion about Part 5 in particular. A commentary track would have been more than welcome. But still, what we get is, I don't want those criticisms to overshadow in any way the great strength and excellence of this particular interview, because it is really excellent. So I want to keep that in mind first. And also, returning to my prior comment, and I'll try to end on this, which is, I don't want to overshadow the point that this set is still brilliant by virtue of the fact, in my view, that it includes this very entertaining film, Part 5, which is very entertaining in and of itself, and also forms a very strong link, and it is a very essential member in this series of films, which is given the title by Criterion as Once Upon a Time in China, the complete films. And the film that I was speaking about today is, of course, the 94 film, which is Once Upon a Time in China 5. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. We will be talking about one more film in this series, which can be found in this set. So I'll hopefully see you at the next video. And then after that, there will be another, maybe another separate video, a 7th video, I think. We'll be talking about other matters pertaining to the set and some concluding remarks. So I hope to see you in those videos if you're interested. But in the meantime, and in any case, my dear friends, I hope that you are well wherever you are in the world. I hope that this video finds you well. And until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies. So thank you very much for your time. As always, I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.